Hi, everyone. Welcome this evening. My name's Danielle. I'm the community manager here at Allara. This is our webinar this evening on nutrition. This is going to be a Q&A style webinar with our two experts here at Allara, who both practice on the Allara platform. Felice Ramallo, she is our lead dietitian, and we have Sarah Stroup, who is one of our clinical dietitians, who are going to be speaking this evening and taking your questions. So many of you ahead of time did submit some questions in your sign-up form. We're going to go through a bunch of those in the beginning. So probably for about the first 20 to 30 minutes, we're going through questions that were submitted ahead of time from you participants. There are some really interesting and amazing topics that we're going to be covering tonight on nutrition. So this is going to be a really rich discussion on some ways that we conceive of having a good and healthy balanced diet, of thinking about weight management and weight loss techniques, of thinking about what to eat and how to eat when we have chronic conditions, especially for biological women. And then we are going to talk a little bit about maybe some myths and misconceptions that kind of come along with social media and what we think about, as sort of accepted diet culture. So Felice and Sarah will talk through a bunch of those questions that were submitted as well. And then for the last half of our meeting tonight, of our webinar tonight, we'll open up for questions from you all. So I hope that you all came prepared for a really rich discussion and maybe some questions that you want to have asked. So we will get started now, and I'm going to introduce our two experts. And just once again, for anybody that had just joined, this is our webinar this evening on nutrition, an open Q&A with our two experts, Felice Ramallo and Sarah Stroup. Felice, I'm going to bounce it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us a little about who you are, what encouraged you to want to practice on the Allara platform. So go ahead, Felice.
Yes, thank you for the warm welcome, and welcome everybody who's joining us today. Of course, my name's Felice, and I am lead dietitian here. I was one of the first, or maybe even the first clinician in the door here at Allara. And I, stumbled upon it like many others do, a targeted ad on social media. And having PCOS, a really common women's health condition, being able to offer this sort of care to other people that I can absolutely relate to is just one of the best feelings in the world. So I love it here at Allara, and I love helping all of you.
Amazing. We're very lucky to have you. Sarah, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us what made you decide you wanted to practice on the Allara platform. Yes. Okay. Go ahead, Sarah. Sorry for that.
Sorry, I muted myself because I had to clear my throat a little bit. Didn't want everybody to hear it. Yes, I'm Sarah. It's wonderful to have all of you here. I'm really excited to answer everyone's questions. I joined Allara earlier this spring. I have a lot of experience in private practice and working in hospitals, and with the different people I was working with eating disorders and women's health and lots of other issues. I found it was really frustrating for a lot of my patients to find really quality providers that were really going to listen to them and make them feel heard and really understand what it's like to be a woman. There's just so many, unique health challenges that women face. So I'm really, really passionate about Allara and the things that we do here, because I feel like it gives women a space to really feel heard and to get really specialized care. And yeah, just really excited to talk through more questions this evening.
Fabulous. Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to start with this initial question. But what does it mean to be a registered dietitian, and why does Allara have registered dietitians on the team as part of our overall collaborative care platform?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with that if Felice, you want to jump in and add to it as well. But there's a lot of reasons why dietitians are important and are really valued nutrition experts. There's dietitians, and then there's nutrition coaches. So nutrition coaches don't tend to need any additional training or degrees or additional education. Dietitians are really trained to treat medical conditions through medical nutrition therapy. So we have lots of training and background to really understand supplements that are beneficial for you, meal plans that are beneficial for you, whereas nutrition coaches, just as like a comparison, tend to have more like blanket pieces of advice. So it's important for Allara, of course, to have just dietitians so that we can offer you really specialized care.
And I'll just throw into that, while there are certainly, nutrition coaches out there that I'm sure offer valuable information, there is nothing that says who can and can't call themselves a nutritionist. The word dietitian is a like legally protected title, so it's one of the ways that we can identify the people that have, specialized training and are really held liable if they do give you harmful information. In this day and age, dietitians are required to not only have undergrad degrees in nutrition, but master's degrees and pass an exam after a year-long period of clinical internships. So there's a lot of things that do go into being a dietitian, not to toot our own horns, but yeah, that's what we're trained for.
You should toot. This is women's healthcare, which is also about making sure that women get the best information possible and that we lift each other up. So thank you both of you for your dedication to this field. Okay. So we're going to go into the next. So now some questions from the crowd here. We're going to talk about some universal tenets about kind of how to nourish yourself for various women's health conditions like PCOS, endometriosis, thyroid diseases, metabolic syndrome, and insulin resistance that we treat here on our platform. So the first question for you, Felice, generally, how should we eat and what kind of diet do we follow for women's health?
Yeah, so wonderful question. I think it's important to keep in mind that any condition that we are dealing with, any disease state, any imbalance comes back to some type of inflammation. There's something that is dysregulatory that is happening to our system. And for just about anybody that I've ever counseled, small frequent meals tends to really, really work well with the sort of biochemistry that happens within our bodies on a daily basis. So what that looks like is eating somewhere between 4 to 6 times throughout the day. That could be a mixture of meals and snacks. It does look different for everybody, but making sure that you break up your meals and eat regularly enough is really, really important. Generally a good starting point for like the balance of all of the different foods is using a sort of like plate sort of visual, whether it's representing how your plate actually looks or thinking about how it translates to the proportions and volumes of the food that you're having. Most of us need about half of the volume of our daily intake from fruits and veggies, and then the remaining half being just about a 50-50 split of starchy foods like whole grains and proteins, which can include plant-based proteins like beans, tofu, tempeh, seitan, can also include animal-based proteins, fish, meat, eggs, those sorts of things.
Awesome.
Yeah, and those are the main principles.
Great. All right, Sarah, next question is for you. How often should I eat, and does eating snacks cause weight gain?
Yeah, I love this question. Kind of like really flooding into what Felice just mentioned. I think it tends to be very beneficial to have multiple like small meals throughout the day. So snacks I feel like kind of fall into like just those eating opportunities. I think it's important to look at, meals and snacks as those are just eating opportunities and ways for you to honor what your body needs hunger-wise throughout the day. So I would say the long story short to that is I wouldn't say those cause weight gain. I think coming back to, again, what Felice was mentioning with just having balance, that's where that can be important for combating some of the weight gain and inflammation is just, when you do have snacks, potentially having things that have a mix of like carbs, protein, and fat so that you are feeling satiated. Whereas if you have, just a carbohydrate-based snack, it's just more likely for blood sugar to kind of come up and come back down, which can leave you feeling more hungry, which can cause you to eat a little bit more, which can cause weight gain and those types of things. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I know that's always a tough question is, are we eating enough? How often do I need to eat? Am I overeating? And, there's so much stigma about that. So good to hear both of you really working on dismantling some of that kind of chatter that we have in our heads and helping our patients to think about what is important to get into the day. Okay. So kind of playing off of that same idea of like what really should we be eating? We got some questions about protein intake, and this is one that definitely comes up a lot on our platform, especially if someone has maybe a specific type of diet that they're following for one reason or another. So why is protein important? How much protein do we need? And what are the best ways to increase protein intake? Sarah, I'll start with you with this one.
Yeah, I love this question too. I mean, protein is definitely vitally important for just a lot of different functions of our bodies. Protein is really important, like I kind of mentioned with snacks, for keeping you full for long periods of time. Protein is one of those macronutrients that really sends that fullness signal to your brain. So very important to have, of course, adequate amounts of that throughout the day. We obviously know too that protein is important for building muscle and maintaining muscle, but it's also a really important precursor for lots of signaling in your brain, like neurotransmitters. Also very important for hormone production and things like that too. So certainly something you want to make sure you're getting enough of if there's any hormonal imbalances and things like that. And as far as needs go, obviously that can be very individualized for a number of different reasons, depending on if you have any medical conditions that can change your protein needs. Honestly, if you're like sick or just like have a cold or something, that can influence your protein needs as well. And then the other big thing is also just how active you are and what type of activity you're normally participating in. That can really, increase the amount of protein that you need. Generally, if you're a relatively like active human and you don't have any huge immune related like medical conditions, generally about like 1 gram per kilogram seems to be like sufficient for most people to maintain muscle mass, to produce those hormones that you need, all that kind of good stuff. Or that's half a gram or 0.5 grams per pound. So if you weigh about 200 pounds, that would be aiming for around like 90 grams of protein a day at least. And there's lots of good ways to get that throughout the day. Kind of coming back to the plate method, generally having about a quarter of your plate being some kind of protein is helpful. But really, if you're having a mix of like whole grains, dairy, other types of protein containing foods like, chicken, fish, plant-based proteins, you generally are getting sufficient amounts if you're kind of mixing all those things together.
Okay, cool. We also did get a question about kind of like some examples, just asking for some examples of like, how do we boost our protein intake? Do you have some ideas for how we might supplement, maybe say like somebody doesn't have a animal-based diet or anything like in that area?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I get this question a lot from a lot of the patients that we work with. So I feel like I have lots of lists now for different like vegan-based proteins and that kind of stuff. But protein powders are a great one, obviously. So are protein shakes, protein bars. But I also lean really heavily on things like hemp seed, chia seed with like vegan or vegetarian diets, tofu, tempeh, seitan. All those are really, really great options as well. Even like plant-based like dairy products are great now too. There's lots of great ones on the market that add in like pea protein and things like that, so you're getting good balances that way. Those I think are kind of like the main ones that come to mind off the top of my head, but yeah.
Awesome. Love that. Love options. Love giving options. Okay. So this is a huge question that is all over social media. We get this, we definitely get this a lot. I think as, folks are maybe just first learning about eating and living with hormonal kind of imbalances and metabolic imbalances. Let's talk a little bit about fasting. The question that we got was, is fasting recommended for PCOS? If so, how long should I fast? Felice, we're going to let you take this one.
Yeah. This is probably another one of those like most hotly contested questions that I get. And a lot of the evidence that is out there on fasting is, quote unquote, for PCOS. people are referring to studies done in people that have diabetes, mixed male and females captured in the studies and things like that. And we do know that men's bodies do a little bit better with fasting than women's bodies do. And generally, whenever you're doing something that changes what you're eating in the short term, there's going to be certain improvements in the labs that we see with shorter term calorie reduction, which that's what happens. Doesn't necessarily work in the long term. With women's bodies in general, the more stable we can keep blood sugar and the more frequently that we can eat throughout the day to do that, the better. Our bodies also tend to utilize both carbohydrates and energy better earlier in the day, because then we have all day to move around, to think, and to utilize that energy, versus in the evening. If you're waiting all day to eat, you're kind of running on empty, and then you're finally eating, and then you're going right into sleeping. You aren't necessarily putting that energy to the best use, and your body might need to use a little bit more insulin to utilize that energy. So I would say fasting, not recommended for PCOS. Generally eat when you're hungry. And that might take a little bit of retraining to get you to eat breakfast and things like that again, but playing around with, eating a little bit more regularly, what feels good for your body. And when in doubt, I do suggest, if anything, a little front loading rather than waiting all day to start eating.
Wonderful. So good to know. Okay. Let's talk about the big topic of the whole platform, usually weight loss. So this question was something we get a lot on the platform, and it was submitted by a couple of folks who submitted questions ahead of time. How do I know if losing weight would be helpful for my health? Sarah, want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, just like everything we talk about, I think this one is especially individualized. Certainly if, for example, you're recovering from an eating disorder and your body is not the size that you want it to be, that would be a case where I probably wouldn't recommend like immediate weight loss, for instance. But certainly if you have, any particular labs that could benefit from, weight loss, that's something that we look at also. So in terms of, if blood pressure is high, or if, triglycerides, cholesterol, all those things are high, there are some studies that show like short-term weight loss can temporarily lower those things. Obviously, the biggest goal is that you have some stability and like sustained weight loss. So with all of our patients, the like big conversations that we're having initially are never, okay, let's talk about how we can help you lose 5 or 10 pounds. It's, okay, how can we incorporate good, like healthy behaviors so that your body is getting to a place that it wants to be at with weight? So just some examples being, how do we incorporate more fiber throughout your day so that you're feeling fuller and more satiated? Or are you eating regularly throughout the day, like we've been talking about? Are you getting sufficient amounts of protein? Like Felice mentioned with the intermittent fasting, are you getting enough like activity throughout the day and enough movement for what your body needs? And typically when we focus on a lot of those lifestyle behaviors and changes, that's where your body is generally going to find the place that it wants to be at. And there are many studies now too that even with pursuing healthy behaviors like those things, regardless if you lose weight or not, like a lot of those parameters tend to improve, like cholesterol, blood pressure. So all that to say, it's all very like individualized, but that's why our initial approach is definitely, start with behaviors and like lifestyle first, and then see where your body wants to go after that. And the other like important caveat I meant to mention with that also is there are a lot of factors that play into weight, a big one being genetics. So that's important to keep in mind too, that, looking at family history and things like that is important, and just taking all the factors into consideration, I think is really important with weight as well. But yeah, hope that helps.
Okay. And Felice, let's go to you. Is there a healthy way to approach weight loss?
Yeah, so I think that a very important thing to keep in mind with all the studies, all the evidence, everything that talks about weight loss and positive associations that we see with weight loss is it's I literally just lost my train of thought. Important thing to keep in mind with all the things associated with weight loss is that it's a game of association. We see that healthy behaviors are oftentimes associated with lower weights, but when you apply that to the individual, especially individuals with conditions that make them predisposed to have more muscle, have denser bones, everything that's associated with elevated testosterone and other things like that, it can't quite be applied in the same way. And I really implore patients to think about what that weight loss is supposed to achieve for them. Is that weight loss so that they can feel more energized? Is it so that they can feel healthier, have better sleep, have better labs, reduce their heart disease risk? If so, let's focus on those things. And let's focus on the interventions that specifically target those things rather than weight in and of itself. And I find that when we focus on those improvements that we're looking for off the scale, whatever needs to happen to your weight for you to get there will happen naturally as a side effect of everything else that you're doing. And if you also are finding yourself aiming for a weight that has never been possible for you to maintain, I would also suggest kind of questioning, what does a healthy weight look like for me? What might that be? And I think the best indicator of a healthy weight is one that is stable and sustainable for the long term. Just like rapid weight gain and it bouncing around doesn't feel good and isn't good for your health, so is rapid weight loss and that sort of downward yo-yo dieting that can happen. And every like 5 years or so, there's international guidelines on PCOS that are released, just to get a little specific here. And this past year, the 5 years came up and the new international guidelines were released. And for the past 2 times, they've really done a great job of emphasizing that weight loss is not necessary to improve PCOS. This is something that all the experts across the globe signed off on. It is not necessary. And really what is necessary is just focusing on those health outcomes and doing the lifestyle behaviors that will get you there.
Cool. Okay. All right. Let's keep on the topic of weight loss here. Sarah, I'm going to jump over to you. We got a question that I think again, this is, as we're trying to kind of get a bit more granular into how we tackle this topic of weight, that feels very top of mind and very important for so many people. Why can't we lose weight, or why can't I lose weight by limiting calories? Are there certain foods that can help me to lose weight? Are there certain foods that I can eat to help restart my metabolism? Sarah?
Yeah, I think this is a great question too. I feel like restarting or like boosting your metabolism is like a really buzzworthy like term that I see a lot when it comes to weight loss. And a lot of the time it's not exactly like all about that. I mean, really looking at the underlying issues that are present, I think is really, really important. If you notice, like this question mentions, like if you're not noticing any changes with like diet and exercise and all the things that you feel like, health professionals are telling you to do, that's where I would start to dig a little deeper, namely like with the help of like a dietitian or like a health professional, just to see like, are there things that are off or irregular, like with hormones? Like, do you have PCOS, or is there insulin resistance? Is there, any gut health related issues going on, like IBS or inflammation and things like that? Because as long as your body is stressed out and inflamed, it's going to hold on to a certain degree of weight. And so those are kind of things that I would pay attention to first. And then assuming that all those things are normal, like labs are normal, digestion is normal, like stress is feeling well controlled, and you feel like you're checking all the boxes and nothing's really changing on the diet front, I think it's still, it's important to then look at, am I getting enough fiber throughout the day? That's one that I think is just especially important for a number of different things, like one with gut health, but also with your blood sugar response and all those types of things. Also to layer into that, are you eating regularly throughout the day? Are you having breakfast like within the first couple hours of getting up, so that your body is functioning well throughout the rest of the day with like hormones and your stress response with cortisol and things like that as well? So I know that's not like necessarily specific foods like to help you lose weight, but that would be the approach that I would probably take if someone was asking me this, of just trying to suss out, what is the other X factor that we're missing, or what other things are happening on a day-to-day basis with symptoms that you're experiencing that could point us to, things to fix or things to like improve.
Great.
And I'll just throw in my 2 cents as well. I think that restarting metabolism, that whole concept, it's really, really tricky. And there's a lot of concepts and like language around it that aren't rooted in science. And then there are a small handful of concepts that kind of are rooted in science and how our body works. And everybody does have a general metabolism. Each of our bodies are basically programmed, I guess, in a sense, to burn X amount of calories in X amount of time. That is what a metabolism is. And we also know that any condition that is associated with metabolic syndrome, like think conditions associated with weight gain. So Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism, PCOS, insulin resistance, those sorts of things. Those all share the sort of genetic components and predispositions that make it more likely that you, compared to your neighbor of same height and weight and age, you might be burning significantly less than that person. Your body is very smart. Your hunger and fullness cues want you to maintain weight and keep you at a stable, healthy place and not contribute towards inflammation by rapidly gaining or losing weight. So our bodies are really, really smart, and leaning into that is a fabulous idea. One more thing that I'll kind of throw in on that sort of like calorie, front is, if you have gone a long period of time not eating enough or dieting, eventually you will reach a point where your body is very resistant to losing weight. And part of it is exactly what Sarah was talking about. A big part of it is exactly what Sarah was talking about, especially with like stress hormones. So giving yourself permission to eat a little bit more, at least for a while, and just lean into those cues that your body is giving you, is going to be the best way to quote unquote reset your metabolism and get you burning an appropriate amount of calories again. Short-term, long-term weight gain, very, short-term weight gain, it's all about calories. Long-term weight gain is about listening to your body. I'm sorry. Short-term weight loss about calories. Short or long-term weight loss is really about, how do we get you to a healthy and appropriate weight for you by listening to your body? And that's a whole conversation in and of itself.
Thank you so much. I do want to have you all answer this question here, because it's a really nice question that we got from the audience. So do we recommend that we get hormone panels done if we're noticing that we can't see progress as far as changes to weight?
I would say that it is really important to work with a doctor or a medical provider who listens to you and who's really hearing what you're saying. And there should be, whether or not they think it is appropriate to order whatever hormone, there should be at least an explanation or in a reason why to help you understand. So in some cases, absolutely yes. It depends on you, it depends on what hormones, it depends on what's going on and all those sorts of things. But it's really important to understand, make sure that you understand like what's going on. And a lot of times labs are a big part of that. Sarah, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I was gonna say too that like I think it's important to look at labs, but I think that is like a good piece of the puzzle. Obviously, like having numbers to put to like things you're experiencing, I think are helpful to then just dig into the nitty-gritty of like underlying things that are happening. On top of that, I feel like we all have patients too that have like clinical symptoms that are coming up that maybe aren't like directly showing up in labs. So that would be kind of the other thing I would be noticing and thinking about too, and then optimizing, kind of the base of like a lot of things that we're talking about, of making sure that you are eating regularly throughout the day, that you're getting enough sleep, with cortisol and like stress hormones and things like that. Obviously managing mental stress is a big part of it, but honestly like eating regularly and getting enough sleep and like hydrating can really help a lot of those things too. So that would be the other like just couple things I would add to that also.
Yeah, I think you both really, kind of really nailed it, that like labs are one piece that is always important for our practitioners to be looking at, but it's also why we do the work that we do here, and we see you for appointments that are more than 5 minutes, and we spend some time really getting to know you, and both of our practitioners here can really attest to that spending time listening to each individual and what is kind of breaking it down, what's going on in your day. That's how we really can dial in on what's going on. It's much more than the lab work, although that is important. So that's why we do the work that we do here in this way. All right, so we're gonna move on to our sort of next overall topic: inflammation. What foods should I be avoiding or eating more of to help with inflammation? Sarah, you want to go with that one?
Yeah, so I feel like Felice set this up really well too, of like there's lots of different conditions that are gonna, increase inflammation in your body. So diet is just gonna be one small part of that, or a good part of it, but one part of, addressing the inflammation. With anti-inflammatory foods, the biggest things that I normally think about are things that are gonna be colorful and contain lots of antioxidants. Generally, when there's more stress or inflammation happening in your body, there's going to be things happening that antioxidants can help kind of detract from a good bit. It includes like a wide variety of things, but really like the biggest thing I normally recommend is having just like eating the rainbow is like my biggest piece of advice. But things that are going to be like red or like blue, purple, like colored foods are really great for like heart related like inflammation or your cardiovascular system. Blueberries in particular are really excellent at getting rid of free radicals and things like that. I would say some other things too, like greens, like leafy greens, like kale, broccoli, those types of things have a really great blend of lots of different vitamins and minerals, but are also going to really help with your liver and your liver functioning optimally. So really just getting like a blend of a lot of different colored foods is the biggest thing that I usually recommend. And then again, 2 cents about adding in the base of like, while it's important to have lots of different veggies and fruits, we also want you to have, carbs and protein throughout the day, because your body is going to feel inflamed if it's not like balanced with all those nutrients that it needs to keep your blood sugar stable and to produce all those important hormones that we've already talked about and all those types of things too. And then I would say just within like colorful fruits and vegetables too, adding to a couple of things I've already mentioned, but like fiber is going to be really important just for negating any inflammation, especially if you have gastrointestinal issues, but also of course that helps with blood sugar balance and some other things. So yeah, on the food piece, those would be the biggest things that I would recommend.
Okay, all right. This is a great question. Why is gluten and dairy-free talked about so much in connection to managing PCOS, hypothyroidism, even things like gestational diabetes? Do we eliminate these from our diet? How do we think about gluten and dairy-free? And is it okay to have some once in a while if we don't have allergy issues? Felice, do you want to start on talking about the gluten and dairy-free topic?
Sure. Absolutely. So I think gluten and dairy-free kind of end up being kind of like scapegoats for all of life's issues, at least in the past few years. I think people like simple answers, people like things to kind of blame. So it's a very easy kind of clickbaity response. And yes, I mean, if you have a sensitivity, absolutely, these things are going to worsen and increase your inflammation, your PCOS symptoms, your thyroid issues, like any of your conditions. If you have a sensitivity, absolutely. However, for the people that don't have sensitivities, we actually see that eliminating foods unnecessarily, specifically these food groups, a lot of our whole grains, a lot of our good sources of, dairy, calcium, all those sorts of things, eliminating them unnecessarily can contribute towards inflammation quite significantly. We actually see gluten-free and dairy-free diets are often higher glycemic index, meaning they're going to cause a little bit more of a blood sugar roller coaster due to the lack of such easy fiber and protein-rich options and starches in particular. And then the extra protein and fat from dairy foods are also really good at regulating blood sugar as well. So in general, I would say unnecessarily removing nutrient-dense food groups from your diet are going to worsen inflammation. unless you specifically have a sensitivity and you notice that these foods are hurting you, try and keep them in and see if there's some other things you can change first.
Great. Really clears up a lot, I think. Sarah, anything to add to the gluten and dairy-free topic?
Yeah, I like how you phrased it. I feel like gluten and dairy, poor little guys, just get the blame for a lot of different things. Because I think what ends up happening for the most part is when you do eliminate gluten, you naturally then have to add in more vegetables, like more fruits, like more protein. And so I think that's where some people that don't have a sensitivity can maybe sometimes see a benefit of course, you're feeling better because you're adding in like more colorful things typically, or you're adding in more veggies generally throughout the day and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think there's definitely, not to say that you can't have a sensitivity. I don't feel like I come across it too often. I think a lot of the time it is just more of like a result of, like I mentioned, like just adding in things that when you can't have gluten. Because then if you're thinking about like takeout options and fast food and that kind of stuff, you're naturally eliminating usually like a lot of those things because a lot of those are going to, have some level of gluten in them. And so that obviously opens up, maybe you're cooking at home more then, and you're having, less sodium or less saturated fats and, things like that. So just a couple things to think about there, but yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. All right. Last one of our big topics, and then we're going to open up to questions. For both of you, Sarah and Felice, obviously, what our big emphasis here on the Allara platform is actually getting our patients to take all of these concepts and apply them into their day and make this a routine, which I know I will admit to it myself. I struggle with this a lot. And most of us really struggle because we've had so many messages from the outside, or we've, kind of incorporated lots of different information from different places and trying to think about what's best for us. So putting this all into practice, one simple question here, what kind of meal prepping do we recommend for patients? Sarah, I'll let you get started there.
Yeah, I love this question. I talk about this on such a frequent basis now, but I love that you mentioned like not everyone is perfect at it. I'm a dietitian and there are several weeks where I don't like meal prepping, so it's not something you have to love. Like every week, everybody has ebbs and flows where, it's going to be dynamic. I think that's the biggest thing I usually emphasize with meal planning. Like some weeks you're going to have the energy to, go ahead and prep and cook like breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the week, and it's all set in the fridge and it looks like social media worthy how like perfectly set everything looks. And some weeks that's just not going to happen, and that's okay. So I think the biggest things I normally recommend is having what I find personally really helpful, and I think what other people have found helpful, is really just kind of sticking with a core group of recipes for the most part each season. So, picking maybe 3 things that you're going to cycle between for breakfast, same kind of thing for maybe lunch and dinner. You have like 10 options that you cycle between for those things. Less is really more, I think, with meal planning, because then it shuts down a lot of like the extra time and like chatter of then having to find a new recipe every week, figure out what ingredients you have to have, buy those things, and figure out how to cook it. So that is kind of one of my biggest things I usually mention. And then also to the point that it looks different for everybody. I personally can't eat the same thing every day. I get really bored really easily, so I don't do that. You're not going to see meal containers in my fridge that have, the rice, chicken, and broccoli, and that's all I eat. Some people thrive on that and do great, and that's awesome. So, if that works for you, that's no shame to those things. But what I personally do is just more like ingredient meal prep for the week. So I'll have, maybe 2 different types of grains that I cook ahead of time or just have in my pantry. Same kind of thing with proteins. I usually try and have at least one protein that doesn't need a lot of prep time, like black beans, or then we'll have like a, chicken or fish or something that can either be thrown in the oven or that I can make at the front of the week and just reheat. And same kind of thing with like veggies and that sort of stuff. I try and have at least one that I can like grab really easily, and then one that maybe takes a little bit more effort, and then maybe one that has to be like cooked in the oven or something. And then I'll just kind of combine all those things like into, salads or like grain bowls or things like that, whatever those like typical like recipes are for me for that season. So yeah, those are kind of my go-tos. That's what I find to be helpful. But what about you, Felice?
First off, I have to say I love the idea of a seasonal menu, like having things you can rotate through on a seasonal basis. I'm gonna have to start doing that. Um, but I find that there's usually like one of two strategies that works really nicely for people. Both the same like underlying concept is you need to carve out time. If you are not going to dedicate the time somewhere in your week, you're going to constantly be like kind of grappling to figure out like, what do I need? What am I going to have for dinner? Strategy one is like the once a week meal plan. You carve out, let's say 3-4 hours to do your grocery shopping and cutting up whatever you need to cut up, prepping whatever you want to prep, and doing that sort of stuff. Also, it depends on how big your family or household is. And then sort of option two is kind of just thinking about picking like 2 or 3 options at a time. I think for people that get more overwhelmed with a large list, like not worrying about picking a time throughout the week, but knowing, all right, let me just focus on 2 or 3 lunch options, 2 or 3 dinner options, 2 or 3 breakfast options. I'm going to expect that's going to last me 3 or 4 days. So maybe I can pencil in grocery shopping then, but just keep it really small. Focus on what you need to get through the next couple of days and leave it at that. There's some great meal delivery services out there and meal kits and that sort of stuff, but you almost always will need to add a little bit extra something. There might be a meal that's a little low in whole grains or a little bit low in veggies or a little bit low in protein. So having some quick options on hand in addition to those is a really nice idea. And then I would say another big overarching concept to keep in mind with meal planning is think about the time that you have throughout the week. If you know it's going to be a busy week, if you know it's going to be 12-hour days or something working like that, convenience options are an absolute necessity. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to cook or you aren't going to be able to sleep. So maybe instead of having a cooked grain like rice or farro or pasta or whatever, you can rely on some like whole wheat pitas, whole wheat tortillas, those sorts of things to give you starches instead of a protein that you need to cook, going for something like canned beans or bean pouches. There's a great company called Dozen Cousins who does like all these different seasoned bean dishes that I love and I keep on hand for these exact reasons. And then my favorite quick go-to for veggies are salad kits. I go for like the broccoli salad kits or the kale salad kits, things that are like pretty hearty so that they're going to last me several days. And it's just a matter of like ripping open a bag, dumping it into a bowl and moving on with my life. So really just being realistic is so important.
So good. And you both really came home with this point that I think kind of really permeates everything that we do here at Allara and that we try to instill as far as care is like there is absolutely some prioritizing of yourself that needs to be done. And many of us are not used to that for any number of reasons. If it's busy jobs, if it's family stress, if it's not ever being given the tools for that kind of thing, that can be really tough and really overwhelming. But like we've seen from Sarah and Felice tonight, that you're not alone here. We're going to give you some tools. We're going to help you kind of strategize through these things. And hopefully if it's you're really starting from, needing to wipe the slate clean, we have so many easy ways to go about this that we build up from the bottom and, and it really kind of becomes a cumulative process, but prioritizing yourself is definitely just step one. And you've all done that by being here tonight. So that's cool. Okay. So question time, the open Q&A. What I will do is if you would like to ask a question, please just raise your virtual hand. It's under the reactions tab of your Zoom. If you can see the reactions, you can do a little raise hand or an emoji or something, and I will unmute you and then you can ask your question. Or if you're not able to, if you're shy, you can put a question in the chat as well. But yeah, would anybody like to ask some questions? Okay, cool. Kritika, I'll read it out since it's in the chat here. Kritika says, I'm curious about cycle syncing and eating foods based on where we are in the cycle and overall recommendations for the same. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll go first. Generally, we don't see studies that have really shown actual like cycle syncing with this seed, this phase, or this food, this phase. We haven't seen that really upheld in evidence, but I would say listen to your body. There's definitely parts of my cycle where I need more sleep, or I need gentler movement, or I need to eat a little bit more, or I'm not as hungry. And I think leaning into that and honoring that within yourself is the best way to quote unquote cycle sync. One of the most common ways that I see cycle syncing come up is through like seed cycling. And I would say just generally getting a good mix of nuts and seeds throughout the whole month is going to be a lot more helpful than just getting the same exact thing for 14 days in a row and then another same exact thing for 14 days in a row. Variety is absolutely essential to get all the vitamins and minerals that you need, no matter the part of your cycle that you're in.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I feel like it's gotten popularized because it gives you like a category of like where to incorporate that variety. But if you're like incorporating those things like throughout like the course of your week and on a day-to-day basis, you're going to reap the benefits of those things with hormones and like lots of other things too.
Yeah, having a structure definitely like helps. That's where most of us feel lost, you know?
All right. Any other questions? You can raise your virtual hand or put it in the chat if you'd like. Okay, Galissa. She asks, I know PCOS patients are recommended to have low GI, is it GI carbs or glycemic carbs? Okay, I'll let you guys figure that out. What's your insight on GI carbs versus low carbs diet?
I have
If you want to find
you can go ahead. I'll let you go first this time.
I was just gonna say, I mean, kind of similar to what we have been talking about. I think lower glycemic index carbs tend to have like more fiber to them. Obviously, there's different like types of just carbs by themselves too that tend to just raise your blood sugar a little bit less. So that's where I feel like it can be helpful for PCOS. But I feel like generally, like if you're combining those carbs with a protein and a fat at meals, you for the most part have a good blood sugar response after doing those things. But just like some examples of those would, be things like sweet potato or like even like honestly rice that's actually been like cooled and then reheated actually tends to have a better glycemic index than like when it's freshly made. There's like a little funky things like that. But that was just like my initial thought is they can be beneficial, but so can just like adding those macronutrients to your meals also.
Yeah, I guess where I'll add things is one, it can be very cumbersome to like look up the glycemic index of things. So if you just generally focus on whole plant foods like whole grains, which is going to be your whole wheat stuff, your brown rice, black rice, wild rice, quinoa, corn, buckwheat, barley, spelt, rye, like the list goes on and on. If you focus on those things rather than their white counterparts, it's going to be lower glycemic index. Potatoes of all kinds, also, I'm a big fan of. And, fruits, varying glycemic indexes, but they all have fiber. And going into the next concept here, we usually don't eat single foods on their own. And generally we shouldn't, like all of our food should be paired to a certain degree with something else. We don't just sit down and eat a bowl of rice and think that that is a balanced meal, right? Like we're going to add some sort of protein, hopefully. We're going to add some veggies, hopefully. And by adding things, you change what's called the glycemic load of the meal. And that is a much more important consideration than the glycemic index of any single food. And I bring this up a lot when I'm talking about like desserts and sweets with people. If you want a dessert or sweet, have it with or after a meal. The protein, fat, and fiber from the meal will reduce the glycemic index. Or you can add protein, fat, and fiber with a sweet, have it with some berries, have it with some nuts and seeds or something like that, little thing of yogurt. That reduces the glycemic index. And then glycemic index versus low carb. For me, it all goes back to blood glucose control. I would much rather see somebody's blood sugar chart looking nice and stable and even, rather than just preventing the highs at the sake of getting into the lows. So I'd say we need carbs. We need them regularly throughout the day. Ideally, the glycemic load of meals are going to be rather low, so that your blood sugar doesn't rise a lot after eating, because that's what causes a blood sugar roller coaster. But as long as you're eating regularly, as long as you're eating foods in combination with each other, you're probably going to be fine. And then I see your second comment here that you recently increased carbs and your period has become spotty. This could be for a number of reasons, and I would say this is probably something to work specifically with a medical professional, whether it's a dietitian or a doctor, to kind of figure out what exactly is going on there.
Great. Anybody else have any questions they want to share? Also, please feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to speak, speak up. We can talk with you that way too. Okay, Alicia, is it bad to eat carbs at dinner if you're tracking your food and know you need more for your macro goals? Yeah, we didn't really talk too much about macros. How do we feel about that?
Yeah, so I know I mentioned earlier that getting more carbs earlier in the day can be helpful for blood glucose control. And I wouldn't say that you need to not have carbs with dinner, but generally, like, you just utilize carbs a little bit better earlier in the day. If you're just going based off macro goals, like maybe macro goals aren't quite like an appropriate guideline for your eating if you're finding that you're being left with a lot to make up at a certain period of time. Sarah, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Like, I think about, like, for the most part, thinking when it comes to this kind of stuff, right? Like, I would say for the most part, you don't want to have like a super carb heavy meal at the end of the day, but like, I would hate for, you to go most of the day without eating, or maybe it was a busy day and you missed like a snack or you missed your carbs at lunch. Then I feel like it makes sense to kind of incorporate those still, like at that dinner meal time, and just kind of notice what your body does and feels like after that, kind of bringing it back to listening to those hunger and fullness cues, or how you're feeling physically after that. Because maybe you have, some carbs at dinner and notice that you still sleep well, or you feel okay physically after. It doesn't tend to like affect you in any significant way. That would be like the other thing I would kind of think about. And exactly what you said about macros, I think if you're noticing you have a lot of something left over at the end of the day, it may be that like you're okay going without that. And with macros too, I feel like it can be finicky following a plan like that, because your body is so dynamic and changes so much even on a day-to-day basis. Kind of going along with what we were talking about with cycle syncing, like there's going to be even phases of your cycle where your body needs more carbs, or it needs more protein, or it like wants more fat. So I mean, really finding a way to kind of come back to what sounds good and what feels good to your body would be like the other thing I would emphasize there.
Awesome. Okay. All right, Marie, great question here. GLP-1 medications. And what do we think about taking those in addition to eating a PCOS friendly diet? Definitely a kind of big hot topic. We did a webinar on, not specifically on like entirely on GLP-1s, but we did this a couple of weeks ago where our medical director and our endocrinologist talked a bit about the GLP-1 medications and what our stance is on that here. But Felice, I'll let you just say a few words about that for Marie.
Yeah, so GLP-1 medications can be really helpful for some people. And I'll just say that, like, it's very different person to person. It is incredibly important that you speak to your medical provider about this, because first of all, there's no way that me, not knowing somebody's background, I can't necessarily give medical advice. And then on top of that, I'm not a prescriber. I'm not the expert in these medications. But I'll say here at Allara, we do have really, really strict protocols on how they're implemented, when they're implemented, and with whom they're implemented. because they're powerful. They can be very powerful in a positive way, and they can be very powerful and in a harmful way. So for the right person, yes, it can be helpful in addition to not even just a PCOS friendly diet, but there needs to be other lifestyle considerations as well, like physical activity, stress management, sleep, all of those things.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, hot topic. Definitely something to always consider with a doctor for sure. And this is not a HIPAA compliant platform that we're on tonight. So, all right. Anybody else with any burning questions that we want to ask to Felice or Sarah this evening? Raise your hand or feel free to put in the chat. Okay, let's do, I know we did have a couple of other questions that got submitted. Since we kind of touched on macros a little bit, what macros are a happy medium from low carb and low fat recommendations that often come with PCOS?
I can kick this one off. So this question specifically asking about low carb and low fat. I mean, I would say low carb and low fat are both very relative terms. Like, ask anybody, they're going to give you a different answer what exactly they're talking about when they say low carb, low fat. But so now there's nationally agreed upon recommendations. Dietitians follow like standardized national evidence. And what these say is that the appropriate population level macro ranges are for carbs 45 to 65%, meaning 45 would be low carb, 65% of calories would be high carb. For fat, it's 20 to 35%. For protein, it's as low as 10%, up to 35% calories from protein. So these are really wide ranges, and I think are also maybe different than what we hear about, like from maybe people online about what a high carb or low carb diet is. This balance for these targets is really necessary to not just make sure that you're getting like the macros that you need for the energy, but it's also really necessary for keeping blood sugar really nice and stable. When you deviate too far from these ranges, blood sugar can become really uncontrolled, both high and low. And you also need the right amounts of like fats and other things to have heart health and all the other common chronic diseases that pop up in the US. And generally, I personally don't see many patients or really any patients doing well below about 40% carbs. That's kind of like my hard stop. No lower than that do I see being constructive. It can even just wreak havoc on your hormones in and of themselves. And then I do find that about closer to the 20 to 25% percent of your calorie mark going to protein is necessary for blood glucose regulation. It's also important to keep in mind macros convert to food groups in a sense. To fit these macros, you need to follow a certain balance, which like something like the PCOS plate helps you get. And that also translates to micronutrients. Vitamins, minerals, they're most abundant in our carbohydrate food group. Fiber, most abundant in our carbohydrate food group. So there's lots of layers to why sort of the balance is what it is.
Thank you. Okay, I have another question that I would like to ask you, but would anybody else like to ask anything that is a burning question? Otherwise, I have one or two more on the list that we can go through. Okay, I'm going back to the list of questions here because this is one that I really like, and I think probably maybe not something that people would think of asking in this forum, but one of the areas that we see a lot of people kind of coming with as they're kind of starting off is the areas of their body where they're feeling they need a little bit of extra attention as far as weight management, and we know that we can't necessarily spot reduce weight, but when we're talking about the kind of stomach area and like that weight in the center, kind of in our center of our core, Sarah, I would like you to speak a little bit on that area and how do we do we know if that's something we should be losing? Or how would we kind of address the weight that comes in the center, in the belly?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I mean, spot on in this question too, that very accurate. You can't necessarily spot reduce. I would say with more abdominal centric weight gain, what that tends to be more closely associated with is there's some level of inflammation or stress happening, whether that's a hormonal imbalance, if your stress hormones or like cortisol is really high. And the reason for that is if you're thinking about your body and how it's set up anatomically and where all your organs are, all of that is really centrally located. Like all your, lungs, your stomach, your, liver that does so much for your body, intestines, all that kind of stuff is in your abdominal region. So when your body's experiencing some level of like stress or imbalance hormonally, or things like that, that's where it tends to like drive weight gain in order to protect you and to protect some vital organs. Kind of bringing it back to like disordered eating as well. Like if you've recovered from an eating disorder, you'll notice if you have had to put on weight, it'll usually gather there first and then disperse once you're back to like a normal eating pattern, because your body is trying to generally protect you. So that's where, I mean, really getting into the more underlying issues that are happening can be helpful. Like everything we've talked about so far, of course, of, looking at your labs to see if there's any hormonal imbalances, addressing any nutrient deficiencies or imbalanced like eating habits that could be leading to cortisol being higher, and those types of things are what I would normally think about.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, all right. And one last question here from Marie. Thank you for submitting this question. If you have high insulin, if you've been making all these lifestyle changes that we've been kind of discussing throughout the hour, do we suggest checking with a doctor every couple of months? And how do we know if we are becoming more balanced? We'll wrap up with this question. I think this is a good place to end.
I'll start off by saying that first and foremost, listening to your body, seeing what's happening with, if you have a cycle on your own, like if you aren't on hormonal birth control or anything like that, seeing what's happening with your cycle, seeing what's happening with your symptoms in general is oftentimes like the best indicator of how your body is doing. And then definitely having some hard, numbers and data, like what we can see in labs, is a nice way to track things. And I would say, yeah, every few months, maybe 3 months, plus or minus, depending on what's going on and what your provider thinks, is definitely or can definitely be really appropriate for keeping track of progress. See what's working, see what doesn't.
Okay.
Wouldn't add any. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, this was really great. Thank you so much, Felice and Sarah, for your time this evening. And thank you everybody who joined and sent in really, really good questions, really poignant questions so that we could have a good discussion. If you have any follow-up questions for us, please feel free to shoot an email over from the invite that you got tonight. We will definitely help to get you in the right place. If you still, have to meet with the doctor, if you still have to meet with your dietitians, and you need some help getting set up with that, absolutely let us know how we can best serve you, and get you all going on kind of customizing your recommendations. This was all, a little bit theoretical and broad, but of course, once you actually are in the sessions with your doctor and with your dietitian, everything becomes much more kind of tangible and realistic for your own life. So please, reach out to your practitioner so that we can help you to figure out what is right for you. And thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Felice. Thank you, Sarah. Everybody have a great evening. Good night.